This is episode 25 with Jay Papasan. Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. So I've recently had the opportunity to get to know a fellow Austinite, author and entrepreneur, Jay Papasan. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Jay, he is the co-author of the fantastically successful book that you've probably seen in every airport bookstore this year, and it is called The One Thing. So Jay co-wrote this book with his mentor and business partner, Gary Keller. And if that name doesn't ring a bell for you, if you're not in the real estate industry, well, Gary is the founder of the largest real estate brokerage in the entire country, Keller Williams. And the premise of the book and the goal for it was very, very simple. Gary's built a billion-dollar real estate company. Jay's written multiple best-selling books. So they've clearly created a process for making decisions and taking action that have led to absolutely incredible results in their life. So if they could distill the cause of those changes, of those decisions, and of those successful ventures down to one thing, what would it be? Well, that is exactly what their book uncovers. But what's really interesting is that the one thing isn't definitive. It's actually different for each of us. And so today, Jay sat down to share this process with you and I so that we can discover the one thing in our lives that will skyrocket the results that we want in every category of our life. This is an absolutely phenomenal session. Make sure you get ready to take some notes and definitely go pick up a copy of The One Thing if you haven't done it yet. Please help me welcome Jay Papasan. All right, welcome back, everybody. Mike Dillard here, and today we have an opportunity to sit down with a new friend of mine that I've made in Austin, and a gentleman who has had an absolutely amazing career in business and one of the most best-selling books of the year out right now, Mr. Jay Papasan, author of, or co-author, I should say, of The One Thing. So, Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. I'm super happy to be here.
Absolutely, likewise, and super gracious for the introduction from our recent podcast guests, AJ Yeager and Megan, who we had on the show here a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to send a shout out to them to say thank you for our introduction and the fact that we've gotten a chance to hang out a couple of times over the last few months. And really excited that you've been willing to come on the show to talk about your story and to really share the insights that you've been putting out over the past year in your book, The One Thing. So I am looking forward to today.
Yeah, and I'll second your AJ and Megan shout out. People should go back and listen to your interview with them on Power Couples. They're good people to learn from.
Absolutely. So, Jay, if you could, I really like it when we have a guest on the show, if they could just dive into a little bit about their story and how they got to where they are today, what industry you're in, because I have a feeling that even though we have a huge audience of entrepreneurs listening to this, that many of them may haven't heard of you, specifically if they haven't gotten the book yet. So if you could share a little bit about your story, that would be phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I guess my story begins when I was about 12 years old. I borrowed my mom's typewriter and tried to rip off The Hobbit in my bedroom on a card table. And I think that was the first impulse in my memory. I'd always loved books where I tried to author something. And that thread, if you followed through my youth, I wrote short stories and passed them around the lunch table in high school. But there was like a couple of little milestones on the journey. I remember an English teacher, we had to write an essay. And I wrote a story about my childhood. It wasn't even a memory. It's one of those implanted memories because people kept telling the story about you when you were a kid that you kind of remember it. But evidently, I chased a black cat around my grandmother's house trying to paint it white with flour and just destroyed her house. And I wrote this story, and unbeknownst to me, the teacher liked it so much, they actually circulated it around the whole school. And all of these other teachers started coming up and saying, I really liked your story. And I had no idea why they would be reading it. But there's a few of those little moments that kind of led up to, then I go off and study English, work in bookstores. And eventually, growing up, I thought I would be an English teacher. And until I got into an MA program, I didn't realize what academics was like. My dad was an executive and an entrepreneur, and you grow up with that around you, and then you see what academia is like, and you realize that, you know what, I don't think this is for me. So I guess at one point I moved to New York, got my MA from NYU, got to study with E.L. Doctorow, some real literary greats. And at this point, I'm thinking I'm going to teach or do something and write novels, and end up getting a job in publishing. And I worked at HarperCollins Publishers and, started in the reference division, about as unsexy as it can get. But then I got transferred, and, the next big dot is I got assigned to this guy named David Hershey. And I don't know if you've heard of him or not, Mike, but he was deputy editor of Esquire for about 10 years. And he's kind of a big shot in New York. And at the time, he was coming straight out of the magazine world and entering publishing. And they just paired me with him because I knew how to do publishing books. And he had the contact database. And together, it was this weird relationship that started with a mutual love of soccer. We did Mia Hamm's Go for the Goal. We did Bill Phillips' Body for Life. I look back, and the books that I got my name in or on just with him have sold about 7.5 million copies. And yeah. I had no appreciation for the education I was getting at the time. I don't know, maybe it's youth, but you're reading manuscripts, and being an editorial assistant or an assistant editor is a high prestige, low pay job in New York City. And I just remember working a lot of nights and weekends. That's where I did, though, meet my wife. She's Wendy Papasan from Fargo, Minnesota. And so we actually got hitched in upstate New York and concocted a plan to quit our jobs, travel the world, and then decide on our destination at a later date. And so we did that. Back in 99, we threw in the towel on our jobs, put all of our stuff in storage, and went backpacking for a 5.5-month honeymoon. And at the time, I'm still not thinking entrepreneur or author for myself. I remember us talking. We're in Italy, and going from pension to pension or staying on friends' couches. And I said, I want to go to North Carolina because there's a great old school publishing company called Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill, and they do these great Gothic Southern fiction and cookbooks and stuff that I really like. And she goes, well, I want to go to Austin, Texas. And she had gone to school in the University of Wisconsin. And this is crazy. I had no concept of this. We're looking at a map in Italy. And I said, how in the world did you end up in Austin? And evidently, if you go to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, right, your closest beach is South Padre Beach in Texas.
Oh, interesting.
So they would drive all the way down from up north to go to the beach, but they loved passing through Austin, and she'd been there once on work. So in 2000, when we came back from our honeymoon, we came here for one weekend, left New York City. It was like slushy and gross, and it was like 88 degrees. We were drinking beer barefoot in the park, and we just moved here without jobs. And that kind of was that weird impulsive decision, which is not typical of me, that got us here. And I ended up freelancing, and then ended up taking a job at a very small at the time company called Keller Williams Realty. And in 2001, when I joined, it was September 2nd of 2001. I think that they weren't even in all 50 states, and there were 6,700 agents in the company. And I had no clue that I would start a publishing career in multiple businesses with my future partner, Gary Keller, who founded that company. But it was very small. And I remember working in a Class C space off of Bee Caves Road and seeing one of the other designers clearly working on a book cover. And I thought he was freelancing. And there were only 27 employees back then. It was a really, really small kind of startup company.
What was your role at that time?
Newsletter writer number 2. Right?
Nice. I can appreciate that. I've written a few newsletters in my time.
Yeah. But I mean, I'd been published. I'd done all this stuff. I'd been at Texas Monthly. And my wife actually just kicked me out of the apartment. I'm kind of an introvert. She's like, you're not meeting people. You're in the apartment all the time. You need to get out and get a job. Mm-hmm. And besides, I needed to make more money than I was making as a freelance writer. And got a newsletter job at Keller Williams Realty. And it was about a year into that when I saw someone I thought freelancing. And I asked him, his name was Brad, I believe. I said, Brad, are you working on a freelance project? And I just wasn't trying to call him out. I just came from publishing. And I just didn't think there were any publishing jobs in Austin. There was like one academic publisher here at that time. And he goes, no, don't you know that Gary's writing a book with this guy, Dave, who was running our education platform? And I just kind of noted the information. And then I literally ran into Gary Keller in the bathroom, like the next day.
Mm.
And this is one of those moments where I'm not, I think if I look back at myself then, I thought I was bold then, but now I look back at myself and think you were fairly meek then in terms of what you thought, your confidence in what you would do. But I remember Gary was in the bathroom and he was fixing something because he owned the building and he made a joke about it. See, the chairman of the board's not too, above fixing the toilet or something. And I just said, hey, Gary, I don't know if you remember when you hired me, but I hear you're writing a book. And, I used to work at HarperCollins. I used to work in publishing. And he did one of those take twos where he stood up straight and kind of half turned and looked at me very intensely. And I said, that's interesting. Come in my office. And we walked back to his office and he was between consulting calls. He would consult one day a month. We had like 15 minutes and the man laid out a vision for writing like 11 or 13 books. And he just laid them all out. Like, here's this book and this will lead to this book. He had this whole franchise of books idea in his head. And he started pitching them to me one by one. And I very famously told him,
I don't know what you mean by.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's awesome that Siri's picking up on the conversation and trying to help.
Oh, yeah. I guess Siri works even when you have it on Do Not Disturb, which
That's
is unfortunate with a new phone.
Well, you were just getting up to this crescendo in your story, so keep going.
That's a real live moment for me. So, oh gosh, it totally broke my chain of thought there too.
So 15 minutes, 13 books.
Yeah. So he lays out this vision for 13 books and he starts pitching it to me. And I very famously said, that book won't sell, referring to the first book we ended up writing together called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, which to date, since we self-published in 2003, has sold over 950,000 copies in an industry of 1.2 million. So I just remember going through it and kind of giving him my opinion. And pretty much on the spot, he called my boss and said, good news or bad news? And he was a bad news kind of guy. And he said, great. Well, you just lost an employee. The good news is I'm hiring him. And literally within a week, I was outside Gary's office and his old secretary's office. He was in between assistants. And he gave me, I think, 2 weeks to create a business plan. And then in 3 months, we wrote our first book with Dave Jenks called The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, and self-published it the next year and sold 100,000 copies. And so that's started with a typewriter, ripping off The Hobbit, and those little dominoes, those little milestones along the way. But I didn't know at the time that partnering with Gary, we've now written 12 books that have sold over 2 million copies. Our most recent one being The One Thing, which is our first business book. And we've launched a publishing company. We've launched a coaching company that he's let me be a partner in. I'm now a partner in his private equity company. So the French English major, and, thank God I was pre-Facebook, but there's like pictures of me with ponytails and John Lennon glasses, right, out there. No one would have guessed, oh, he'll be a private equity guy someday. He'll be a business author someday. It wasn't in the cards, but life, you start making these little detours, you connect with the right people, you develop the right habits, and your whole life can change.
So based on that, was there a specific moment or, another pivot point after that one, which was obviously huge and set you off on an entirely new career path? But I guess let me ask you this. What were some of the biggest lessons learned that you took away from working with Gary that have really had an impact on your career since then?
I love that question. And it's really, I know the answer immediately. The very first thing, and if you ask my wife, you just asked her cold next time we're out, say, what's the biggest thing you've learned from Gary Keller? And she's going to say, we learned to think bigger. And every single time I think I'm thinking really big, he'll challenge me to think bigger about it. And he'll ask a bigger question. When we launched The One Thing, we knew we wanted it to be a number one bestseller. And I did tons of research, and I thought we had to pre-sell about 44,000 copies. And I had a plan to pre-sell about 50,000. And he just stepped up, and in 10 minutes, we had shifted our gears, and we were trying to build a platform to pre-sell 100,000 copies in the first 4 months. And because we did that, we did hit number one. But he just always will up it. And it's always a little challenging for me, but he always asks me to ask a bigger question of my life. And therefore, when you find the answer, it almost means I have to grow. I have to behave a different way in order to achieve it. And everything has changed. My morning ritual, we can walk through that, just my attention to being more methodical. As a creative, I want to be all over the place. I want to stay up till the middle of the night watching movies and reading novels and getting inspired. And now you look at my life and I'm incredibly productive. I was up at 5:10 this morning and starting my day, where I used to be a bit of a night owl. And so just there's little habits, and I could break down 5 or 6 more, but the first one that led to everything was, and it sounds trite, but he really did say you have to start thinking bigger. Pretty much anytime I ask a question now, I'd say Gary would make me double that. So I just go ahead and double that.
well, what's interesting, I had an epiphany many, many years ago, which is no matter what goal you set, how big it is or how small, whatever it may be, you're still going to put the same amount of work in and time. Mm-hmm. And so you might as well set the bigger goal, because at least at that point you have an opportunity to hit that, because you're going to put in the same amount of effort. Whether it was 44,000 books or 100,000, I guarantee you guys put in the same amount of hours you would have one way or another, but you focused on a bigger win, which obviously you guys have hit. So,
well, it's the opportunity cost of our time, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is another lesson from that very first book is what's your dollars per hour, and what's your dollars per hour doing different activities. And, you could just pretty much look at whatever you make on an annual basis. What is it? You divide that by, 50, and you'll get your hourly wage. I used to know this off the top of my head, but you could take your annual wage, figure out what your hourly wage is, and then compare it to the jobs you're doing. How much would it cost me to hire someone to mow my yard? Right. And if you're doing lower wage jobs than your potential, you're essentially wasting your time. And he just kept saying, how much can you maximize that number one asset, which is the investment of your time? So I'm just totally taking, I'm piggybacking on your idea that you said there, because that resonates big time for me. And it's this idea that for me, it's the most precious asset we have is we all get the same number of hours in the day. And the people who live the biggest and do the most are the ones who spend it in the wisest manner, right? They invest it very purposefully. And because they see the big opportunity, they say no to all the small stuff. And that's a lot of what our book, The One Thing, really was about, is just unwinding how that looks.
You know what I'm interested in knowing where you stand right now, because obviously you have your hands in a lot of different things with Keller Capital and everything else that you're doing with Gary. And yet at the same time, you're still putting these books together and writing The One Thing. And one of the most frustrating parts about being a fellow author is that doesn't scale. At the end of the day, if I'm going to write a book, I've still got to sit down and I've got to write a book, which obviously can take months and months to do. And so is that a part of your thought process these days as far as how do you scale yourself, or are you okay with the fact that that just comes with the territory of writing?
There's two ways to look at it. I think that yours is very genuine, and there's only a handful of people that have maintained their validity and scaled it. You look at someone like, is it Tom Patterson that writes all of the mystery novels? Mm. Pretty much everybody knows he just comes up with the ideas and other people write the books now.
Okay.
And pretty much all of the big fiction authors at a certain point, I'm pretty sure, when I read my, Lee Child, Jack Reacher novels, that at this point, like 18 books into it, I'm not sure that Lee Child is still writing these books. Mm. It doesn't feel like the same author to me. Mm-hmm. Can't prove it, but that would be a pattern of how you can get leverage in there if you can build an identity of your books and make it formulaic enough and successful enough. There will always be people willing to write those books for you to edit or coax to your level or your standard. So you have to first establish your baseline, but you then can bring people to it. So you can also hire ghostwriters. The way I prefer to look at it, and I might be thinking small, so you can coach me on this because I like where you're going with it. I think of, if fundamentally for me, writing business books, how-to books, my outcome that I'm looking for, or besides hopefully being rewarded in terms of profit for that endeavor, is I want to help people be better. And so fundamentally, it's the same thing that makes me enjoy teaching. For an introvert, I get a lot of pleasure out of standing in front of a room and teaching, which is weird. And it's not something I expected for myself. I like to coach people. I like to advise people. Whatever that thing is, I'm scratching it when I'm writing a book. But book writing is kind of one of the most scalable ways in the world to teach, right? Books can last for centuries. They can become classics. I mean, we're still reading Socrates. The leverage in terms of his messaging is enormous. So there's that way of looking at it too. And that's the way, when I think of books, I think of it as one of the most legitimizing and expansive ways to share a message.
Right. Absolutely.
So every hour is magnified in that sense.
So walk us through really the inception behind, the one thing. This is if you guys have been in a bookstore or an airport at any point over the last, 6 months or so, you've probably seen this book on display as I have. It's just been absolutely everywhere. So if you wouldn't mind, what was the story behind the idea, and when you sat down and you decided, hey, let's write a book. This is what we want it to be about, and how you took it to bestseller status since then.
Sure. So I think it was back in early in 2009. At the time, my day job, besides writing books with Gary, was I ran our university, Keller Williams University, and we had been developing a course to help real estate agents lead generate. And I remember we had the course almost to the finish line, and I brought it in for Gary's review, and he really liked the content. We were basically teaching what we now call time blocking, 3 hours a day for a sales business. And he just said, it just needs some pizzazz. And it was a Friday afternoon. He said, can I take it home for the weekend? I know we're on deadline, but I wanted to see if I can write an introduction that'll maybe bring a little bit more inspiration to it. And so on Monday we met, and he had written an essay, it's like maybe 12 pages long, called The Power of One. And essentially it was about, in a very roundabout way, some of the first ideas about the one thing, about identifying the thing that matters most in your business life or your life, and then how to apply the maximum amount of time to your top priority. And there's this thing, I'd been in the publishing world, I'd worked on some big books, I had seen authors chase books for money, which they weren't authentically connected to. And the moment you saw them on an interview, you realized that they were kind of faking it. This wasn't their life. This wasn't what they lived. They just were writing a timely book. And I remember thinking, this is Gary's book. Like, if there's one thing that is universal in his life, the thing that has made him an entrepreneur, the thing that has pushed his businesses, now to number one in the world, and we were well on the way back then, just my publisher's instinct said, this is it. This is his topic. And I remember we sat down and I just said, this is a book. We need to turn it into a book. And we were all in agreement. And we started, so it was 5 years before it got published. We started outlining and researching the book. We ended up hiring 2 full-time researchers. This was our first book outside of real estate where we were established. And we both wanted to make sure that we didn't write one of those books that was just a bunch of ideas. Or just our take on things. We wanted to put a hypothesis out there and see if science and experience and other people validated it. And so I don't think we expected to take 5 years. It just took that long. About 2.5 years into it, we were right in the thick of a major recession, and we actually hit pause and wrote another book called Shift in about 4 months, which is a real estate book for agents to navigate those downtimes. So I tell people kind of with a wink, we were writing a book about focus and we got distracted and wrote another book, but that's just the reality. But at the end of the day, we partnered with a Ray Bard, who runs the Bard Press here in town. And I spent about almost 2 years trying to recruit him to the cause, because I'd heard not only are almost all of his books national bestsellers, so he's exceptionally good at picking winners, but he only does one book a year, which for publishers is incredibly rare. He puts all of his eggs in one basket and then tries to make that thing amazing. And I just said, look, if there was ever a publisher that needed to publish a book called The One Thing, and he bought onto it. He actually didn't publish but one book over 2 years to work on our book. And I remember when we sat down, we delivered our manuscript. It was 440 pages. And our research that the researchers, it was probably 4.5 feet tall if you just stacked all the white papers up. It was so well researched. And Ray, being a good editor and a good publisher, just said, hey guys, this is awesome. But when someone buys a book called The One Thing, they don't expect the doorstop. So I'll have to now cut this back. You've done your first draft. Now cut this back to its essentials. And that was really like the 30th draft. So we went through about a 2.5 month period where we really asked the big question, like what is truly essential for the reader, for them to get the outcomes that we want. And the book today is about 225 pages. So we cut it almost by half. And put it out into the world. And I can just say that our partner, not to go too geeky, but Ray is exceptional at what he does. And the design of this book has won 11 different industry awards. It won all kinds of, notable release kind of recognition because we really tried to put a lot of love into every aspect of it. And so we set it up. And I don't know if you want me to go into a lot of detail, but we had already been New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today bestsellers, Business Week bestsellers, but we had never hit number one with any of our books. And we just set the goal of, we really want to blow this out of the water. We want it to sell 1 million or more copies in its lifetime. We want it to be a classic. In order to do that, it has to really achieve its goals for the reader, and we'll have to do a really exceptional job of marketing it. And, we set the goal of that number one bestseller. And that's really about the mechanics of how can you motivate your audience to buy it in a very concentrated period of time.
Right. What would you say is the typical window for a book, once it's released to make its impact or not, right? To sell or not sell?
I think most traditional publishers will tell you 3 months. I think it's actually less than that. It's a very archaic system. It's very old school, and it's maddening to technological entrepreneurs about how antiquated the systems are, how poor the reporting is. But bookstores sell books on consignment. And typically they have up to 3 months or 90 days to return all the product and get all their money back. Mm. And so if Barnes & Noble made a big bet on our book and put 20 of them out on the table, and 45 days into it, there's still half of them there, they're not going to reorder, and they might start shipping them back. And to become a bestseller, you have to, one, have a lot of books in circulation so that a percentage of them can sell in the same week. For instance, to be on the New York Times business list, the how-to list, which is one of the most difficult lists to hit, you need anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 copies sold in 1 week just to appear at the bottom of that list. Mm. To be number one, it might be 25,000 to 35,000.
Right.
So it's just, most books don't even get that total distribution. Like if all of their books sold and not all of those books would be reported, they wouldn't have a chance to hit the list. Mm. So it's one of those things that if you're a business person and it's an outcome you want and you want to do it in an ethical way, because there are literally people out there that will slap a credit card, use a shell company or a shell partner, and buy a whole bunch of their books to go sit in warehouses.
Right.
And they get exposed every year.
Right.
We didn't want to do that. We wanted to do it in a way that really was, scripted and we had a really reliable opportunity of success, but also wasn't just blatantly gaming the system.
So you've mentioned once or twice now that it was really important that this book accomplish the goals for your readers. What are those goals? Well, the first thing that we wanted someone to do, like one of our first things we do when we sit down to write a book, is we have a piece of paper, and I don't even know where this came up with it. I still call it the PR outcomes. But when someone closes the book, what's the one thing they're going to be compelled to do? So what will they do differently because they just read this book? And we'll write that down. And what will they say about it? And what we really wanted people to do more than anything when they close this book is ask the question, what's my one thing? What's the one thing that I can do that really will move me forward, either right now or for my whole life? And we felt so strongly about it. I don't know if you've seen the back of the book. I don't know if a lot of people don't keep their dust jackets, but we didn't do any of the traditional marketing. There's no quotes from famous people. All it is a giant question mark. Like we hit that again and again throughout the book, that we want people to just start asking that question. What's my one thing right now? What's the one thing I can be doing such that by doing it, everything will be easier and necessary? That's what we call the focusing question. And in our experience, when people ask that question, they're amazingly accurate. In fact, most people know what they should be doing and feel guilty for not doing it, but they just don't ask the question. And so they don't ever acknowledge reality. So that's what we wanted. And so far, so good. We're heading into our third year of sales, and book sales are up year over year, 30%. And we haven't meaningfully changed our marketing. What that says is that there's some word of mouth undercurrent, and it's unusual for a book that's been out there for a couple of years to be moving up instead of just kind of fading away. So can you give an example of maybe some powerful answers to that question that you've heard people come up with, or people that are around you that have come up with it, just so people can really get a tangible understanding of what that looks like?
Well, to give you a little background of why that's at the heart of the book, when you just kind of say it like that, it's like, people are like, really? That's what the book's about? Well, I just wrote that down. We interviewed top performers in multiple industries, athletes, musicians, business people. And our theory is that if people are truly going for extraordinary success, not average, but like the kind of success people would say, well, that person's a master at what they do. We believe that there would be a lot of commonality, and that's what it showed up, is that the approach to doing things at an extraordinarily high level, most people, even if they're in really different industries, have a lot in common. And it's usually some combination of time on the task of overtime. So if I really want to be good at playing the violin, you've heard the 10,000 hour rule, right? I'm going to invest, maybe as much as 4 hours a day for a 10-year period. And if I'm truly focused on mastering what I'm doing during that period of time, it's focused practice, I'm going to become a master. It's an investment that gets you something. And so most things involve an activity, a key activity that you have to do regularly. So writers tend to write, programmers tend to code, athletes tend to practice. Those are the patterns that we see. And so that's at a really high career level, but on a really simplistic level, I remember one of my favorite reviews that ever got posted to me for a book. The guy came out and he was asking the question in the different areas. And I shared in my speech, I said, where I'm making a stand right now with my kids is at that time, I was walking them to school every day. I'm a working dad. I'm not there when they get home from school. But in my experience, the excitement about school happens right when they're going in and right when they're coming out. One of them just wasn't going to be available, but I could organize my life to walk them to school. And while they were still young enough to want to hold my hand, and I made kind of a big deal. I said, this is a really big thing. It's kind of the center of my universe with them, is making sure that happens every single school day. And it launches our day. When I come home, we're revisiting what we talked about that morning. And it's very different than coming home and saying, how was your day? And they say, it was fine. Because they're done with their day by the time I get home from work. But it changed everything. I remember this guy wrote me a note, and he just said, because of that clarity, I've switched with the jobs with my wife. I'm now dropping my kids off at school every day, and it's made all the difference. So you just ask the question in the areas of your life that matter most. And, I can role model other specifics. Like my wife and I have been on now an 8-year journey where we try to, about once a month at a minimum, I do it actually probably every week now, we calculate what our net worth is. We decided that the ultimate scorecard for financial health was going to be net worth. And if we measure that on a regular basis, it would create a cascade of awareness and habits, and it has. Ever since we started tracking that number, we know that when we buy things that aren't assets, our net worth goes down, right? We're watching our fixed expenses. We're watching our cash reserves. And it's just this awareness that's made everything move in the right direction. And so you can ask that question, my health, my diet, what's the one thing I can do in my number one relationship? And the answers are usually unique to the individual. Like my answer may not be your answer, though I do think net worth is something I would advise everybody to do. There's no harm in it, that's for sure. But I think that that's the way it works. You say, what's important to me? Not trivial. It's not, what's the one movie I can pick tonight on date night that'll make the date great? That's a little bit of a trivial way of thinking about it. But what matters? It's usually relationships, businesses, health, spiritual. Those are the areas that I see people asking the question and looking for a really meaningful answer.
I like that. One of the goals that you and I had discussed when it came to this podcast was really doing the same thing here with the show, is leaving someone or leaving everybody listening to this with something that they can implement that's really tangible and they can walk away with from the show, with here today. So, we've talked about things like time blocking, and that's obviously something that AJ and Megan learned from you as well. They talked about that on their episode as well. But what would be really, I guess, the one thing that we could share here with the audience today in the time that we have left that they could walk away with and implement today that would really make a huge impact on their lives?
I think it begins with identifying your number one priority. One of my favorite pages in the book, and it's the only page number in the book I can ever remember, is page 114. We outline the 7 areas of your life where you ask the question: spiritual, health, personal life, key relationships, job, business, finances. And, I don't care what your answers are. It might be, cat videos, because that's what moves your world. But ask the question, and then of all of those areas, what's the thing that I need to focus on now? Maybe it's my finances. Maybe it's my job. Maybe it's my key relationships. And I think the mechanics of it, right? The framework that in the book we laid out, and then we try to coach people to do, is when you know your answer, you'll know it when it's an activity, right? It's not a state of being. I don't need to be happy. What are you going to do to be happy? And so laugh, whatever. And then we usually ask people to schedule it, and schedule it early in the morning. So whatever your number one priority is, as much as possible, knock it out as early as possible every single day. And research shows that about 66 days on average is what it takes to make that a habit. So in the beginning, for, more than 2 months, you're thinking, I've got to get up and go to the gym. I've got to get up and go to the gym. I got to set 3 alarms to get up and go to the gym. And in about 2, maybe 3 months, it's, an average is only so useful. You'll start waking up before the alarm goes off and reaching for your gym shorts, right? That's how habits go. And I think that's the greatest secret in the world. You look at really successful people, and I bet, Mike, you know tons of them from your business dealing. If you really look under the hood, they are, in fact, creatures of habit. Some of them are really regimented, and some of them are a little bit more loose. I think you shared that, you always identify your top 2 or 3 priorities, and you just to really make a habit of getting them done every day.
Right.
I tend to say, I'm going to get it done before 9 a.m. I want it done. I want to have a great day before noon, if possible, because there's a lot of research that shows that you're mentally going to be a little bit more scattered the later in the day it becomes.
Right. Absolutely. So figuring out what that priority is, and this is a subject that we've talked about many times on the show, actually, when it comes to, productivity and discipline, if you will. We've talked about this with Jarek. We've talked about it with Ty Lopez, obviously, because this is really the key to accomplishing all of your goals. And having been in the entrepreneurial education space for the last 10 years, I've get emails and messages every single day from people who are wanting to start their very first business, or to go from a part-time business to quitting their job and going full-time. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, this is not necessarily a matter of positive thinking and goal setting. It's execution. And so really that's what this comes down to, is making sure, from what I hear you saying, that you are focused on the one thing in your life that you can execute on every single day, that if you do that, it will completely change, that particular category of your life.
Exactly. That's a great summation. And I think the beauty of it is once you've developed a habit, right? I usually will make an example of my kids. They're 11 and 9. And I can tell you for a fact that the habit of brushing their teeth twice a day is still being developed. And right. Because it's a little bit of a battle all the time, right? Yet you and I, we spend almost zero cognitive awareness in making that decision on a daily basis. And it's just a fact that at some point, through our parents' diligence or our own, we figured it out at some point, we started doing what we knew we needed to do. And then once it's a habit, it stopped taking up any mental brain power. So when you do your one thing, and the moment it becomes a habit, maintaining a habit takes very, 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 very little very little energy to do. The people who go on to look like they're superhuman are the ones who immediately go to the next thing. Well, if I got that knocked out, right? I got that toothbrush thing knocked out, I'm going to start flossing my teeth, dadgummit. That'll add 6 years to my life. And then they'll work on that until it becomes a habit. And over time, because they're being purposeful, they accumulate this collection, this collage of incredibly powerful habits, many of which they're just not even aware of. They have networking habits. They have ways that they discern different things. And because they focused on it for a period of time, it just becomes internalized. And, the trick is, if we're not purposeful about it, I think 40% of every day is pure habit. I think that's just the research. I had a conversation with Gretchen Rubin, who wrote a great book on habits called Better Than Before. And that was what her research turned up as well. So 4 out of every 10 hours is just purely automated in terms of how your brain's working every day. If you don't focus on building good habits, you could have bad habits. And as powerful as good habits are at driving those agendas forward just relentlessly, even when we're not thinking about it, bad habits do the same thing. And so to me, I think that's the big trick here. It's not just that one trick pony kind of thing, like I'm going to start getting up earlier and meditating every day. Well, that's not going to change your world, but that might become the foundation for, the meditation, which leads to the reading, which creates the inspiration for an amazing writing session on a regular basis. And I'm just spitballing here, but that's kind of the way I see it play out for people. The one habit they form will give them confidence and create kind of a halo effect. And then they start adding to it. And at some point, that becomes the thing that they do, is they acquire these power habits, and consciously or unconsciously, and they really can become amazing at what they do by just adding a little bit and a little bit and a little bit.
So one of the ones that you discussed obviously here was measuring and being aware of your tracking really your net worth on a monthly, now a weekly basis. Yeah. What is one of the others that you've implemented as well that you feel have had a really massive impact?
We talked about this a little bit when we had lunch recently. I've got multiple businesses. I've got 5 businesses that are financially significant, right? That take up time and energy. And I asked the question, what's the one thing I can do that would contribute to all of those businesses with one activity? And the number one thing I came up with, and I've been doing it I'm on my 3rd year now, was refer talent to them. And talent being defined by me as someone who's kind of amazing at what they do. And I have a coach. I talked to my coach about it. I had some goals about building a publishing company and building some other things that I really wanted to launch. And I don't need to run those things. I just need someone who was born to do them. But as an introvert, I had to go find them somehow. And so our plan, and you just don't laugh, but my very modest goal was just to meet one amazing person a week. I set the bar as low as I could. And I made it my Wednesday morning coffee ritual. And I started broadcasting it to the world. Who do you know that's amazing at what they do? I have got no agenda other than I just want to start meeting some more amazing people. And I would invite them to coffee, usually at Austin, Java, right there on Barton Springs Road. Mm-hmm. And we just chat for an hour. And I would see if there was something in my network, if there was a book I could gift them, anything I could do to contribute and just make that good connection. And those turned out to be some really, every now and then you get a dud, but a lot of them were really awesome. And the goal was to add 50 people to my network every year. And so the first year I did exactly 50 and quit. And then the next year I decided to keep doing it. And lo and behold, the people I'd met said, you should meet Mike Dillard. He's really cool too. And then they start kind of building a wave behind you. And I did 79 the next year. And this year I think I'm on pace to do over 150.
Wow.
And so that one little thing, I just made a stand. And I remember enlisting my assistant in the beginning. I said, you got to hold me accountable. I want this from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. every Wednesday. I want it blocked off. And if I don't have someone in there by Monday, you need to say, who are you calling this week? And you can hold me accountable. I'll make you the boss of me. And she helped me out. When she saw people were fishing around trying to make connections, she might sniff them out a little bit and say, hey, this person really seems like a cool person. I put them on your Wednesday calendar. And then I started broadcasting it on speeches, that was one of the things I was doing. And people would come out of the crowd saying, I want to be a Wednesday morning coffee. And, I think you put it, if you're an introvert and we're not naturally going to go out and seek people all the time, how can you attract them? And for me, it was creating a habit and then, just kind of inviting the world to help me fill it. And that's been really significant. I think 4 of the last 5 hires that we've made in our businesses have come from people who either I met with or I asked those people and they referred someone to me.
Yeah, so it's funny. That reminds me of your Austin version of what Necker Island is for Richard Branson. And, I've had an opportunity to go spend 2 different weeks out there with him over the last couple of years. And that's really the purpose of Necker for him is he has built this giant piece of beautiful cheese in the middle of the British Virgin Islands that the most talented people in the world want to come to. And it happens to be his house. So he really has this big magnet that just attracts amazing people to. And you're doing really the same thing in a slightly different way than he is, but he is an introvert as well. And so I find that really fascinating that this magnet, strategy, if you will, is being used by, some of the smartest people I know. So
I love that story. I hadn't heard that story, so that's completely new to me. I'm definitely going to go research that and maybe even write about it.
Well, I don't know if that was his intention or not, but when you see him there and you're spending time with him, it's very obvious that is what it's become over the years and decades for him.
Yeah, it's just part of the function of having this thing.
Yeah, well, everybody wonders why would you always invite 20 or 30 people to your private island in your house all the time? Wouldn't that get annoying? And but for him, that's bringing in the most fascinating people in the world to his doorstep.
Yeah, he's not doing it for the write-offs at his level.
Right.
But it did, to go a little funny about how these habits grow. We have this metaphor in the book and we call it the domino effect. If you've lined up dominoes, you can make one domino falling over, knock over a whole bunch. And, I think the world record, is 4.5 million dominoes, which kind of blows the mind. But one of the little esoteric things we've turned up is this guy, Lauren Whitehead, discovered that a 2-inch domino can knock over a 3-inch domino, and a 3-inch domino can knock over a 4.5-inch domino. And so if you line them up and could build them physically, that 2-inch domino would start that chain. And by the 18th domino, it would knock over a domino bigger than, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Mm-hmm. And by the 31st, it would be 3,000 feet above Everest. And the 51st, it would be almost all the way to the moon. Mm. And that kind of geometric growth. And when you build one of these small habits, and I wonder where that started for him. That's what this chain is coming from. It might have started from another habit, and then whether consciously or unconsciously, he's getting to bigger and bigger venues because he either wants to have more people or higher level people that he's attracting to those moments in his life. And I had the aha a year and a half into my little experiment was what's happening now is when I actually do this and it connects, this is a cool person. Well, obviously you want to spend more time with those people, right? You want to meet them for happy hour or do something else. If you really made a dedication to do that to your whole life, you will run out of time to spend with people. And I told my wife, I said, we've got to have a big, at least twice annual party. Because the only way you can have that many people and meaningfully have touches, we had to start thinking bigger. So we started hosting movie nights a couple of times a year for our business, just so that you could at least reach out, talk to them, and invite them to something where you could get face to face. Because as an introvert, I just couldn't say yes to all, the inevitable invitations to do lunch or have happy hour. But I did need to get back together with them. And you just over time, it magnifies. And, I hope someday to have an island to invite my friends to. That would be cool.
Yeah. Well, part of my vision board is to create the same thing, here in the Texas Hill Country outside of Austin from a ranch perspective, and to create a venue that is so, really inspiring and amazing that people would want to have events there or weddings there or whatever it may be. But you really just create this magnet out here in the Hill Country that would really serve the same purpose. And so that's one of my goals here in the next 3 to 5 years is to build that. So.
Well, I don't know if you know the guy that he wrote the book Wizard of Ads, but he has that Italian villa and campus down in Dripping Springs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm familiar with him. I haven't had a chance to work with him yet or meet him, but I know who you're referring to in the book. But I was not familiar with the fact that he had done something similar.
Yeah, and he's created a magnet that people fly from all around the world to come sit in a classroom with them, and they have weddings out there. I went to a wedding out there, and that's where I met him. Mm. But, started with this little ad company and then built it. And now he's built one of those places. My free advice you didn't ask for about the ranch. My wife and I bought one with a friend last year, and it's a very humble affair. Okay. But put something exotic on it if you can't do the full on Italian villa. We bought an ostrich and people want to come and meet our ostrich. And that's enough. That becomes its own kind of little mini magnet. And so we bring people out there. We're having our whole team up there next week.
Very
Elta
cool.
the ostrich.
Very cool. Very cool. I love it. So, Jay, if we've got about 5 minutes left here. If there's something that you would like to share, a final pearl of wisdom with folks, or a lesson learned, piece of advice, that you would like to leave the audience with, this would be an amazing moment to share that.
Well, I think I would just encourage people. I mean, the theme of your podcast and what you're helping people do is take ownership of their life. And I think that success is always defined by you. So I just would encourage people to ask the question, what am I working so hard for? What is ultimately my one thing? What is all of this about? And if they can get clarity on that, the moment they get clear where they want to go, way down the road, and why that's important to them, the next step becomes a lot more evident, and they're a lot more likely to take it. And so I just think that we're just so busy. There's so many opportunities. There's so many obligations, dropping the kids off, sick parents, all those things. It's really hard sometimes to stop, maybe take a morning with a journal or a cup of tea or an evening with a glass of wine and really ask some of those questions and reflect on them. And most people I know, when you ask them those kinds of questions, they just almost get scared. But it's a powerful, powerful thing to have that honest conversation. And even if you're not 100% sure, you don't know the destination. I don't know if it's Detroit or New York I'm heading to, but it's north. Just pick a direction and start walking down that path. And I've found when people have done that around me and me personally, that their life becomes happier, their velocity starts to pick up, their confidence goes through the roof, and the things they thought they would never, ever do or accomplish suddenly become possible. And it usually begins with just that little ounce of clarity about picking a direction and some clarity about why that's important to you. For me, it's about impact. I figured that out really late in life, but the moment I did, I was like, you know what? I'm writing these books not for the money. It's for what it does for other people, because that was always the highlight of my day. And getting clear around that helped me say yes and no to the right things. So that would be my one, token bit of advice kind of based on our conversation today.
I love it. Jay, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day here today to come on the show and share your pearls of wisdom with the audience. I know I've picked up a ton of ideas. My head's just been the wheels have been turning as you've been talking this entire time with ideas and insights. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And where can people go find out more about you? And obviously, they need to go pick up a copy of The One Thing. Jump on Amazon right now, guys, and pick up a copy of the book. Obviously, this is a life-changing concept, and it's a phenomenal award-winning book. So go check that out. But where can people go to follow you and your work?
Well, the good thing is I'm eminently Googleable, so they can just Google my last name and catch me on Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on all of those. Instagram's my guilty pleasure. But really, for informationally, just go to theonething.com. And it's the number one thing.com. And there's all kinds of information on everything we're doing around the book there.
Very good. Well, Jay, thank you again, and wish you the best. And I assume I will see you at some point here in the near future.
I hope so. Thanks a lot, Mike.